if logic unlocks the mind and emotion unlocks the wallet, then to be able to tap into that emotion is to tap into an endless supply of connection, engagement, and of course, sales. And emotion is a key in storytelling. And I'm very super pumped and excited to have with me here award-winning filmmaker Alex Stein, who's based in LA, who talks about the fact that, and I've got just a little cheat sheet here, that telling stories is what distinguishes us human beings from animals, but it also does something else. So Alex, super excited to have us here today. Tell us about the power of story through the eyes of an award-winning filmmaker.
Story is very, very important, and story is really what connects us. If you look back at human beings, for tens of thousands of years, we've gathered around campfires and in homes and told stories. It's really part of what makes us who we are. And I think that's a real reason why when people die, for example, you tell stories about them. You keep their memory alive. You keep the most vital, important part of who they are alive. And so I've been a screenwriter, a story consultant, a documentary filmmaker, a live storyteller, and a producer of live storytelling events for many years. And story is kind of in my DNA. And I think it's really in all of our DNAs, but story is the thing that gets me excited, is the thing that gets me pumped every day of my life.
Yeah, story, I must admit, we have sort of that in common. Story is something very, very close to my heart. And what's interesting is a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs who'll be watching this really do struggle with their story, and they feel that their story doesn't have value and that other people don't want to hear it. In your personal opinion, how accurate do you find that belief?
I think it's very true that it is so prevalent. And when you talk to people who aren't used to telling stories, who are, for example, pure business people, and you say, well, it's important to tell a story, they will say, well, I don't have any stories. And then I find that whenever someone says that to me, if I talk to them for 5 minutes, I uncover something that is just astonishing and amazing. And maybe it's something that they think everybody else does, so it's not really that important. Or maybe it's just something that they don't realize is unusual and authentic and very compelling. I think a lot of us, we live our lives and we sort of go through, our day-to-day, whatever we're doing, and feel like it's just a grind. And we don't realize sometimes that we can zoom out and see like a larger context of what we're doing, or we can zoom in and see like a little struggle that is very compelling and will resonate a lot with other people.
So in your professional opinion, as a professional storyteller, what are the key elements that make a story? So for those who are watching this, entrepreneurs and small business owners, what were the 3 things that you know that when you look into their background or into their life's journey, that you will find a story, just to give them a little bit of direction to help overcome that objection of, I don't have a story, no one wants to hear my story. 3 things that you would look for, Alex, that is going to find a story.
The first and most important thing always is authenticity. So we want to see something that is about you. We want to see something that is not, modeled after what you've seen on TV, or modeled after your friend who tells stories down at the bar, or modeled after someone that you admire. We want to see stuff that's really about you. And I think that even though we live in the world of reality TV shows, people can really tell the difference between what's authentic and what's not. And we respond on a very primal and instinctive level to things that are authentic. The second thing is to be specific. And I think a lot of people try to back off from specifics because they think, I want to reach a much wider audience. So, for example, if I'm obsessed with ceramic figurines of rabbits, and I talk about ceramic figurines of rabbits, then
that's pretty random, by the way. Are you a collector of rabbit figurines?
I'm not. Someone mentioned that to me this morning, and it's stuck in my head.
Yep.
So even though most of us are not collectors of those figurines, if you talk about them, we will recognize the passion that you bring to it. Now, there is a flip side to that, which is if you go into great detail about the, rabbit figurines and the glaze and the paint that's applied to them, people's eyes will start to, roll back in their head, and they will stop listening, because at a certain point that is not as important to them. It's not as important to them to spend 100 minutes on that as
And
it is
just
to you.
And just to interrupt you there, I'm
Mhm.
thinking the correlation here would be for entrepreneurs and business owners is what you're basically saying is you've got the general passion about the figurines and the rabbits. But when you get into the specifics, which would be the benefits, the features and the benefits, you start to lose people, which is what a lot of entrepreneurs do when they're, selling their events or they're selling their products. They get bogged down in those benefits and features, which is where they start to lose people from the story. Would you say that that's an accurate translation of what you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you want to make sure that you don't get so deep into the weeds that or I guess that's the wrong metaphor. You don't get so deep into the trees that you lose sight of the forest. Because what we're talking about generally is a forest, and the way you get into the forest is by talking about some of the trees, but you don't want to go so deep into the tree that you lose sight of the forest.
So it's that authenticity where no one can take your story. So that helps separate you, and it really does distinguish you from your competitors. So being true to that instead of the imposter syndrome where you're trying to pretend that you're someone that you're not, which
Right.
Yeah. And then there's a specificity of niching that story without becoming bogged down in the features and the benefits. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. And then the third element, because I'm a Virgo and I can't let us go without getting to the third element, because then it will just bother me for the rest of this interview.
Well, thank you for your time today, Alex. That's all we've got.
So the third element is emotional connection, and really making sure that you get to why this is important to you. So going back to this example I wish I hadn't brought up about the ceramic figurines of the rabbits, maybe when you were a kid, your mom gave you one, and this reminds you of your mom. Or maybe there's some kind of meaning that it has to you. Whatever that is, and those are very bad examples, but whatever that is, you need to convey that to people. And I think a lot of people, especially some business people, are reluctant to do that because they feel that this makes me vulnerable. This makes me seem less professional. And I think what it really does is it makes you more human, and it makes us able to relate to you and empathize with you much, much better.
Now, I know that one of your specialties is empathy, isn't it? Is emotional resonance in stories.
Yeah.
Explain, and also what something means to an expert is not necessarily very someone who's not an expert or an influencer doesn't see it the same way. So emotional resonance in a story, please help us see that through your eyes. What does that mean and look like to you so that we can understand what it is and how we can be tapping into it?
Yeah. So I could give you a very dry academic view of this, because again, I'm a Virgo.
Do you need to, for the Virgos out there? Why don't you give us the Virgo, and I'm an Aquarian, then give us the high above the clouds Aquarian version.
Well, the thing about Virgos is we like to learn all about astrology and then not believe in any of it. So we like to be covered for that. I think the easiest way to explain this is with an example. And I have an example that literally just happened a couple days ago. So I want to share that. I am a big fan of the Iditarod sled dog race and made a documentary about the Iditarod called Mush. And I have co-hosted an Iditarod podcast for the last 6 years. So I'm very involved in that world, which is a wonderful niche filled with people who are crazy in mostly all the right ways. And the Iditarod is going on now. It's about to be finished. The last team is going to come in later this afternoon. There's a musher who finished the Iditarod a couple days ago named Larry Doherty. And he's a very interesting, great guy. He's an oncologist in Anchorage. He climbed Mount Everest. He carries with him on his sled prayer flags that have the names of his patients, both his current patients and
Wow.
patients of his that have died. So, we go from, here's a guy who ran a sled dog race that's 1,000 miles, and that's pretty impressive. That's certainly more than I've done. But then when you start adding in these details, you want to know more about him and you care more and more about him. The other
Absolutely.
the other part of this story is there's another musher named Jason Campo, and Jason Campo did the other 1,000-mile dog race, which is called the Yukon Quest, about a month ago, and he had stopped to help the dog, to help corral an escaped dog from another musher named Hugh Neff. So Jason stopped to help someone. In the course of getting this loose dog, he fell, hit his head, had a concussion that was fairly bad. He had to be medevaced off of the race and taken to the hospital. And he was, dealing with his doctors, getting ready to run the Iditarod. And he said, I don't know if I can do this, but I'm gonna do my preparations and get ready in case they clear me to go. And then literally 2 weeks before the start of Iditarod, he realized that he wasn't able to run the race, but his dogs were doing better than they've ever done. And he didn't want to rob his dogs of the opportunity to run this 1,000-mile race. So he called Larry Doherty, who had run the race before, but wasn't planning on running it this year, and said, I don't want my dogs to be deprived of this. Can you help me and run the race? And they have bags of food that are sent out to remote checkpoints, and all of his food had been sent out and everything was set. He just needed someone to drive the dog team. And Larry said, yes, I'll do it. Then Jason's father drove the dogs in a truck from Alberta to outside Anchorage, got there 10 days before the race, and Larry Doherty had then 10 days to do what he called speed dating with these dogs, getting to know these dogs, running the dogs several hundred miles before he started the Iditarod. And when he started the Iditarod, even though Larry Doherty is an American and a very proud American, he had a Canadian flag that he was flying for Jason, and he was wearing a hat, a red hat with a white maple leaf, and he had a little hand-lettered sign that said, for Jason.
Oh, wow.
So now suddenly, this is a much more engaging story than just, here's a guy who ran 1,000 miles on a dog sled, which is not a horrible story, but you start adding in these emotional layers, and then suddenly it becomes something that you really, really want to know more about, and it really draws you in. So
Yeah,
that's an example of what I'm talking about.
and then a spectator becomes a participator, and that they're cheering on the hero of the story.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So tell me, and beautiful stories, by the way, and my journalist brain is going, did they share that with the media? Like, what incredible stories. They stopped to help someone else and then got hurt, and then someone else had to step in, and what an incredible story. And even just the doctor planting the flags on his sled of all his patients and taking them across this 1,000-mile or 1,000-kilometer, 1,000-trek journey that they're not fit enough to do or may never be able to do, or, like such incredible stories. And, we started this conversation, quite rightly so, and that stories are handed down from generation to generation. And what's interesting is that people hone in on these facts, and they hone in on these features and these benefits and these deliverables as entrepreneurs and small business owners, but that's not the stuff that people remember. And
Right.
on your bio that you sent me, Alex, you were talking about people think that you remember an event, but you remember how the event made you feel.
Yeah. And that's real. I think that's one of the most important takeaways, is that, and we've probably seen this when people try to retell jokes that they've told, and they're not used to like the format of telling jokes, and they'll tell the punchline first, or they'll mess up the story, because I think that we like to think that we remember events, but we really remember events, I think, as ways of connecting these emotions.
And we remember the events from the stories that we collected or heard or shared as well.
Right. Absolutely.
So
And
in terms,
sorry, I was just going to say, the things that we are told and that we remember from when we're kids can be amazingly, amazingly powerful and really stick with us all our lives.
so how do I sort how do I sort through the parts of my story that I should be sharing from the parts of the story? Like, how would I know, as a amateur storyteller, as a business owner, recognizing the value of the story, which parts to tease out or where to start first? What would be your advice? And then we'll finish that with Alex. We'll finish on that note, Alex, and I'll invite people to come and get in contact with you so they can obviously learn more about this, because we
Right.
could, and I would love to interview you again, because, you know, such depth of knowledge to share. And this is such a fascinating topic. And particularly in this day and age, you will see a lot of it on social media and in mainstream media. The power of the story is becoming full cycle. People want to know the storyteller. They want to know the business owner. We are so connected, but so disconnected. And we crave that connection as humans. So I'd love to have you back. I'd love to, I'm just putting you on the spot here. Love to interview you again. Is that a yes?
That's a yes.
So tell me, how does my analogy would be, how do you sort through the loose end from the chaff, from the oat and chaff? How does a business owner sort through, where to first start looking for that emotional resonance or the vulnerability in the story, that it is hard when you're close to it to see the wood for the trees, to use that
Right.
forest analogy again? What's your advice? Where should they go hunting first?
I think there's a number of techniques that you can use. The first and one of the most powerful is to really think about what it is that you're trying to convey, and not what it is in terms of details and facts, but what is it that I'm trying to convey on an emotional level? Do I want people to think that my product or service is exciting? Do I want them to think that it will make them a better person? Do I want them to think that they can do things that will improve the world, or that they can do things that will make them seem cool or be cool or whatever? So I think that's an important place to start. And
so the end in mind, what is
yeah,
the outcome? What is the connection you're seeking, or the impact you're seeking? So start with the end in mind.
yeah, and I am a big fan, especially when you're doing things that are relatively short. So if you're doing something that is like a 1 minute message, or even like a 5 minute message, I'm a big fan of doing that over and over again out loud. So when there's something that is different about the way we listen to things than the way we read them. So,
I'm just going to pause on that.
Mhm.
There's something different about the way we listen to things as to how we read them.
Right. So if you have a message, if you have a message you're trying to convey and you're reading it, that's a completely different experience than if you hear it.
Mm.
And I think that, especially for people who are used to writing a lot of stuff, you don't realize sometimes that you're being wordy, or that you're expressing something that is difficult, or that's cumbersome, or that's going to trip people up. You tend to hear that a lot more readily than if you just see it. So
And there is that, of course, there's that copywriting technique on your feet out loud,
right.
where, and it's also something I learned in I think my first year of journalism many years ago, was when you read, even though it might be designed to be read, when you read it out loud, you can also make the written word more powerful, because you hear where it stumbles, you hear where it slows, you hear where
Yeah.
it's too fast, you hear where it disconnects.
And the other thing is, if you have friends or family members that you can read this stuff to, that you can read aloud to them, you will very, very quickly know when they are lagging, or when they are really wanting to go in the kitchen and make a sandwich, or when they, when you just are going too deep and have lost them. And on the other hand, you'll also know very clearly when you're hooking them, and when they're really responding to things. And after a while, you'll develop the ability to know that without needing as much feedback from other people, but that can be just absolutely invaluable. And I've done a lot of live storytelling shows, and there's
I was waiting for that. Yeah. So please, you can continue, because I know as a speaker, when I speak in front of a live room and I might have a new talk or I've changed it, you can very quickly see in a live audience where the tumbleweeds go and they kind of glaze over, and where they're
Right.
leaning and they want more. Yeah.
Yeah, and there is nothing as powerful as being in front of a live audience, people who don't have to listen to you. They're not, they're not married to you. They're not your boyfriend or girlfriend. So you have to deliver for them. And that can be very scary for a lot of people. But once you start building that skill and you can sort of know very, very quickly how to read the room and just when people are leaning forward and when they're leaning back, and when they're looking at their phones or whatever. So that kind of direct interaction with people that you can get through just doing this in front of your friends or family is really, really helpful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. Now, how can people connect with you? How can they see more of the documentaries that you're up to, see what else you're up to, what live events you might have coming up, what programs you might have? How can they connect with you further to share in more of your stories? Where would you like to send everybody?
I would like to send everyone to my website, which is alexm, as in Michael, Stein, Stein, .com. And now that I'm thinking of it, I probably should have had something that didn't require me to spell out two things, but alexmstein.com.
Thank you so much. Like, this is just such a fascinating topic. And I really do hope for those of you here watching this, really give yourself permission to start sharing your story, because, it's very interesting how business goes in cycles. And there certainly was, probably going back a long, long, long time, you very much wanted to keep your personal life separate from your professional life. And it's certainly not saying share warts and all. But in this day and age, as I said before, when people are so connected in terms of via technology, they are very disconnected. We live in gated communities, we live behind computer screens, and there is a craving to connect. And when you share stories to connect, when you share your personal why, when you share your personal hero's journey, when you share those hero's journeys of your students, of your clients, then you can truly make that impact and you can connect. And by doing so, when you do connect with your customers or potential customers, then of course you can help more, and that will give you that impact. So I do feel that there is this, and Alex, I'm sure you agree, there's this very full cycle where the power of the story is really coming back into its own. It should never have disappeared. I mean, let's face it, in all of the religions, it's stories that are passed down from generation to generation, and it's stories that we remember. It's stories that inspire. It's stories that trigger action. So I do hope that you go and connect with Alex further and learn how to develop your story, learn about which elements of your story that you could be capitalizing on more, and put into play his awesome suggestion, advice to go practice on those, who are probably your toughest audience. Those who already know your story. So if you can get them engaged, if you can get them leaning in, then you've got an absolutely crushing story, and you can go crush it live storytelling, live video, and live speaking in front of audience. So Alex, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. This has been great.